to get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Ingrid Mittmannsgruber, and I'm a teacher in the Humanities department. Now, the order of the day is actually our Humanities Symposium. Welcome to our annual Humanities Symposium. I'm really grateful that you all took the time to come here. Thank you very much. And I also hope that you will take the time to come to our other events that are still to come this week. Like, for instance, tomorrow morning, there's a really great one, right at, I think, 8 or 8:30. So if you're around, don't miss it. Now, this year's symposium theme is a question, an important question. It's not just a theme, it is a question also, I wanted to say, and an important one at that. And I'm sure you all know by now what it is. It's actually the question of what is real. Now, what is real, of course, is a question that most of us want to have answers to at some point. Often already, even quite young, we ask that question, and we start to pose this question many times over throughout our lives. We want it answered because it's not just an abstract intellectual question. It's also a question on which we depend, on which our quality of life depends, on which our being depends. So there are many other reasons as to why we want it answered and why we can't just take it or leave it like it is a luxury. For one thing, even if you say, well, I don't care about it, it's very close to who you are. So figuring out who you really are, for instance, what is real about you, is really very important. And then from there, we go on to what action should I take, what's really good for society, and so on. So there are 100 reasons, 1,000 reasons why what is real is a really important and good question, and why we should pay attention to it. Because I guarantee you one thing, if you don't take interest in what is real will take interest in you. Now, if you get easily bored with intellectuals sitting around talking for an hour about what is real, I understand. But then we have the perfect event for you today, because you won't have to listen to one or two heads talking about what is real for 1 hour, but you actually have 8 of my colleagues from Vanier College that are all teachers talking about it. And they will not spend an hour, just talking about one topic, but we actually have 8 people talking about different topics, each one for no more than maybe 7 minutes. That is, if I don't drone on for too long, okay? So, so with this in mind, let's get started. And the title of this talk is actually a kaleidoscope of 5-minute perspectives on what is real. And so, short, incisive. And with this in mind, I want to introduce our first speaker, Katie Rose, who is a humanities teacher here at Vanier. And Katie will talk about stories we tell.
Thank you, Ingrid. Gonna set my timer.
Yes.
Ooh. Okay, hi everybody. Well, today. So I'm talking about the stories we tell, and I've been thinking really a lot about our human quality of storytelling. The way that as a species, we take these little pieces of information, our sensory perceptions, and we put words to them. And from those words, we start crafting these narratives. We pick and choose the little pieces of our day-to-day existence, what to emphasize, what to leave out. We notice patterns, we build structures, and we make stories out of these collections of stimuli. As we navigate this world around us, we also look for meaning to shape linear storylines, figure out causality, correlations, consequence. We create these myths and origin stories to try to make some sense out of the world around us in all of these bits and pieces. Why do bad things happen? Was it somebody's fault? Could it have been avoided? Why did this one person end up happy? This other person end up with all these bad things happening to them? Are there steps to take? Are there patterns to look for? Is there some kind of person who ends up with a good life in the end? What kind of person am I? And as we try to answer these questions, storytelling becomes a huge part of our creation of it and our creation of ourselves. As we grow from infants to children to teens to adults, we hold and acquire these raw pieces of our identities, and we fashion them all together to create some sort of narrative about who we are as people. The music we like, the clothes we listen to, right? Our strengths, our weaknesses, our beliefs, our hopes, all these little pieces of us. Sometimes it's just all a jumble within us. We don't put a story per se. It coexists. It doesn't need to fit together. But other times, we're on the spot, and we need to make some sort of story out of it, find a narrative. First day of class, bunch of strangers sitting around you, introduce yourself. Name, pronouns, maybe a few fun facts about you. Maybe you're at a party, and you end up talking to somebody interesting. What do you do for fun? You walk into a job interview, HR person asks, tell me a little bit about yourself. I promise you, each one of these stories will show something about you. But they're going to show you 3 very different stories about who you are, what you believe, where you're going in this life. Our stories change in the context that we're in. And that's not to mention our online selves, right? From a snappy Instagram bio, 150 characters there, into this tricky world of online dating some of you might wade your way into. We're living in this world where we're not only sharing just our inner truths, we're marketing ourselves. We're shaping our identities into this commodity for others to observe, to consume, in hopes of more likes, subscribes, follows, maybe some ad revenue, maybe a sponsorship deal. And in the world of dating apps, anything from a fun night out to the love of your life, no pressure. If it's marketing, I think we all understand that when we're marketing something, we're selling it, we're not getting the full truth, capital T. And when we are selling something, we have to work our best angles. So now we find ourselves in this world where we're constantly offering this edited version of ourselves up for consumption. We're choosing our best stories, our most relatable or attractive plot points in this story we're telling. We're objectifying ourselves in the process. And we're not dummies. We understand that the stories that we're telling and the stories that we encounter are incomplete, right? We go through, maybe they're straight up false, headlines that are clickbait after clickbait. We see glossy images with this impeccable ring lighting. Something is showing us something somewhere, but is it real? Can we trust it? Seeing isn't believing in this world with these endless amount of outtakes that got cut out before we ever saw them, creative cropping, filters, AI, deepfake. Where's the truth at the core of all that? And there's a much bigger picture out there too. When we zoom way out, we realize that our personal stories, built out of our interests, our tastes, our feelings, our experiences, these are all glued together in this sort of invisible narrative that we're living in around us. Why are we speaking the language that we speak? What's the story there? Why are we in this space, on this land, at this time? What does it mean to be from here? Whose version of history is the real one, and whose stories have just been lost forever, never to be heard again? The stories we tell have the power to shape others' perceptions, but they also have a sort of almost supernatural power to shape the reality around us. If everyone believes one version of a story, who's to say it isn't capital T true? If we silence any counter-narratives, all counter-narratives, do they still exist? Online, we see deplatforming of whole sides of stories, demonetization of accounts, shadow banning, while increasingly we start consuming more and more of just those stories that fit in our narrative of the world, fed to us by an algorithm that gives us more of what we already know and like, anything just to keep us scrolling and clicking along. It can be overwhelming. But in the last 1 minute of this talk, I'd like to just slam on the brakes for a second and take a moment to try to declutter some of our stories, our inner stories. So take a moment, settle in, close your eyes if you feel comfortable doing so. Take a deep breath in. Take a deep breath out. Okay, breathing through your nose, feel what it feels like to have air entering your body. It comes in cool, comes out warm. Feel what it feels like to have a tongue in your mouth. Feel what it feels like to have weight in your body sinking into the seat. Feet on the floor, the temperature of the air on your skin. It's interesting, right? Feel what that feels like. And in this little moment, as I try not to run too much over time, think about who you are. No algorithm, no editing, no appearance, no clicks. Think about what makes you, you. Not your productivity, not your value as a commodity, not your body shape, not your R-score. Think for just a moment about what your story is without any of those things, who you are, inhabiting this space in this world. Thank you.
thank you, Katie. Our next presenter is David D'Andrea, and he will speak about the reality of myth. David?
All right. Does this work? We'll see if the technology works here. I'm going to see if I can call up a PowerPoint. Downloads. It's called The Reality of Myth. All right, and I have it up on my screen. Yeah. Okay, good. I think that's good. Is there a way when I click on this from the beginning? Is there a way to have my notes on my screen? Maybe not. Maybe I don't need my notes. You guys will see me wing it. This was done reasonably late in the game. I'm called in as a replacement for my colleague David Koloschik. So you're going to see some live academia. Okay, so we know the theme of the symposium is what is real, right? This eternal existential question, right? What is truth? What is real? And we know that this is especially pressing right now. We have the technological crisis of the real that other presenters have already spoken about. Online, obviously, there's all sorts of fake news from one direction or another, deep fakes. You might have heard of the Taylor Swift unfortunate photos that apparently have been circulated, various propaganda from one organ or another, one state or one actor, narrative warfare is being embraced by the powers that be, right? But I would say there's also a sort of a spiritual crisis of the real, and this is deeply rooted in the modern period. A nerd like me, a humanities teacher, might start with the philosophical tradition, David Hume and people like that, the reemergence of skepticism, of virulent skepticism in modernity. We see it evolve and mutate in postmodernism, but also in the lives of basically everybody in our cultures, which are steeped in irony and alienation. And there's something of polarization in the current moment in 2024. We have appeals to rationality and expertise. Trust the science, trust the experts. Experts like me with a graduate degree might appreciate you guys trusting us, but then there's skepticism. Should we trust the experts? Should we trust authority? Shouldn't we resist authority? So there's a sort of a counter narrative of hashtag resistance, seeing the expertise and the authority in the social institutions as oppressive systems of power that need to be resisted, and which see in the irrational, the imagination and the prophetic, a means of escaping the oppressive power of these social institutions which claim to be rational. Right? And there's something funny about this moment because we've got both of these at the same time, and sometimes the very same people sort of switch from one to the other almost without noticing, okay, that that we are arguing two sides which are very much in contrast. Okay, ambiguity and paradox, those aren't new, but maybe we need to sort of adjudicate and integrate this polarity. All right. In the psychoanalytic tradition, there's a kind of an idea that if there's an internal sort of psychological split, that one side of your personality is going to be maybe repressed, put into the shadow, Carl Jung would say, and then the other side is identified with, but then that which is repressed doesn't go away. So we see this polarity where, you know, expertise and authority, and then this anarchic, creative, irrationalist sort of reaction or subversion, and they sort of alternate. Right? Carl Jung would say that these polarities, these contradictions are real, and we can't disown one and just embrace the other, that we need to stand in the tension between the opposites and integrate them, hold them together. So who is Carl Jung? Well, as this, of course I did real research, I Googled. Right, I found this image, and sometimes he is associated with all sorts of kooky stuff, paranormal phenomena, seances, right? Irrational sort of ideas, mythology, weird religious ideas from various cultures. Even, yes, he was interested in aliens long before the YouTubers of 2024 picked that subject back up again. It's hot today. Right? But Jung isn't just a kind of a champion of the irrational. He also has his side, which is very much grounded in the scientific method. He considered himself a scientist, right? And there's a side of Jung which is picked up by evolutionary biologists, right? Very controversial question. Okay. So we see Carl Jung. This is him as a young man. He worked in an asylum in Switzerland. Here's his wife, Emma. He was a protege of Sigmund Freud, and they agreed until they didn't, right? And at a certain point, they disagreed violently because Sigmund Freud wanted a scientific psychology based on sexual theory, and Carl Jung said, but what about the mythology? What about the religion? We have to take these ideas seriously, right? If you watch David Cronenberg's film, it's a great one. I'm going to speak briefly. Right? At the core of Jung's method is sort of comparative mythology. So he said that if we look at the mythology of this religion and this culture and this culture and this very different culture and this culture from across the world, far away, we can look and find common patterns in them. And these patterns are hints about our psychology. Right? The patterns which are common across cultures. Right? Cross-cultural constants are probably constant in human nature. They're psychological patterns which are built into us by the evolutionary history of our species. They're part of our nature. After Jung split with Freud, he had a bit of a nervous breakdown, and he had a bunch of, frankly, visions, almost hallucinations. He collected them in this book. I'm going to go through them quickly. He found these visions coming up from below, and he knew that he had to tend them carefully. And these are all images that he drew when he was having his crisis period. Right? He knew these visions from below were something dangerous, but they also held out hope, and we have here an image of the snake, the serpent, coming up from below, but the tree of life growing out of her mouth. Right? He knew he'd have to undertake a perilous voyage. And here's another image that he drew. This was probably influenced by Egyptian mythology, which had the story of the sun. After it set, it undertook a perilous voyage in the underworld, only to be born again in triumph and hope. He found within himself the authority figure, the father figure who he had looked for. He'd failed to find it in his own father. He'd failed to find it in Sigmund Freud. And he found it within. Right? At the end of his voyage is something like integrity, stillness, being able to be at peace with yourself and to live with the contradictions within your own psyche. So what does Carl Jung say to us in this very difficult period that we are living within? Well, these polarities are real, right? I would say that those of us who embrace the authority of science, of expertise, who want a rational society free of populist irrationality, there's a truth there. But then those who advocate the irrational, the irrepressible, the anarchic against the institutions of power, there's a truth there as well. These are archetypal truths. They reflect patterns which are deep in human nature. Right? Carl Jung says, to have any understanding of the real, we have to first accept our nature. We are part of nature, as the Taoists teach us, right? And even when we struggle and we rebel, when we fight against the structure of all being, there's an old saying, you can't go against nature, because even when you do go against nature, that's part of nature too. All right, thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you very much. We continue our journey through the history of ideas, I guess, with Timothy Bude, and he will talk about how Plato ruined the Western mind.
All right, so the topic for the symposium is what is real, and I've decided to address this by talking about how Plato ruined the Western mind. Some of you have heard this story before, I can see. How is the question of how Plato ruined the Western mind and the question of what is real, how are they related? I'm going to try and give you the really short version, and then I'm going to try and take like 3 minutes to unpack it. In 5 minutes, I can't be terribly informative, but I can be provocative, so I'm going to be a bit of a naysayer here. How did Plato ruin the Western mind? He ruined the Western mind by charming us, by seducing us into thinking that the question, what is real, is a good question. It is not. It is a bad question. Plato tries to get us to think it is an important question, a central question, maybe even the central question. It is a terrible question, and it's a terrible question, I think, because I think it's a lazy question. What is real, and just the word real itself, is there, just as its opposite, fake, to shut down dialogue, to shut down conversation. No good conversation ever started with fake news. Fake news is an attempt to shut down dialogue. Real is doing the same thing from the opposite end of the spectrum. All right, let me try and unpack why I think that to be the case. How many of you have read any Plato? All right. Of those of you who have read Plato, how many of you have read The Allegory of the Cave? All right. So, if you've read any Plato, odds are you've read The Allegory of the Cave. It is the most famous bit of Plato, and I'm going to take it for granted that you have some familiarity with it. I'll give you the quick guide to The Allegory of the Cave. The Allegory of the Cave comes in 4 parts. There's inside the cave. There's inside the cave and out the mouth. There's outside the cave and at the mouth, and there is in the presence of the sun. Inside the cave, there is a whole society of people who are chained down and forced to look forward, looking at a screen which is projecting shadow puppets. By the way, this is a brilliant piece of literature. I think it's a terrible piece of philosophy, but it's a brilliant piece of literature that lends itself to a lot of modern interpretation. Imagine a whole society of people chained down staring at screens. It's hard to imagine, isn't it? Who's been on the metro lately? How many people are looking at anybody else? Hard to imagine. Now, this is the setup. This is the setup. The interesting thing is, these people who are staring at their screens, just like us, believe what they are looking at is real. They are convinced this is reality. What is being shown to them is reality. But in the story, and this is the brilliant part of the story, there is an escapee. The escapee gets out of his chains, and what does he do? He turns around. He looks at something else. He turns off his phone and gets a different perspective on the world. The interesting thing is, he turns around to see what is causing the shadow puppets on the screen. He now has a new perspective on what he thought to be real. What he thought to be real, he now recognizes is not. The interesting thing is, we don't learn lessons very well. And so what does he do in stage 2? The exact same thing. He looks at what he's seeing and says, oh, this must be real. There is nothing else out there in the world. But of course, we know, for those of us who have read, we know the shadow puppets are being made by, I'm going to call them cutouts, obviously not cutouts, but you get the idea, cut out of a sheep. Let's say there's a cutout of a sheep that's creating an image of a sheep in a shadow puppet. The escapee leaves the cave. He leaves the cave and realizes, oh my goodness, what I thought to be real in stage number 2 was in fact not real. How does he know this? Because he looked somewhere else. He stopped looking in the same place. He changed his perspective. Now, by the time we get to stage number 4, if you're familiar with the Allegory of the Cave, this is looking at the sun. Great advice. Thanks a lot, Plato. Once we get to stage number 4, our escapee has changed his perspective 3 times. He has turned around and gained new knowledge by abandoning previously held beliefs. Abandoning previously held beliefs. You could be forgiven at this point in the conversation for assuming that the point, the conclusion of Plato's Allegory of the Cave is, if you want to gain new knowledge, turn around. Oh my goodness. All right, I'm going. turn around, change perspectives. But that's not what Plato says. By the time he gets to stage 4, the answer is, look at the sun. What am I supposed to see here? What am I supposed to see here? Plato does not tell me. I am told to look at the sun. Don't turn around. Don't look at anything else. Don't change perspectives. Don't look behind the curtain. This is where the real lies. Now, I can make sense of the first 3 stages, the idea of abandoning previously held beliefs. I've done that many times in my life. I'm assuming you have as well. And in the Western world, we have done that in science and in literature. What to make of the sun and what the sun represents, I have no idea. And this is after reading a lot of Plato. I'm starting to think, after many years of reading and talking about the allegory of the cave, that the answer is this. The sun is whatever Plato tells us it is. And that is the answer of a prophet, not a philosopher. This is why I think it's a bad question. The question of what is real is the kind of question that should be left to priests and prophets. The intellectually curious should turn around and walk on by. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess you just destroyed everything I said at the beginning. Don't believe me anything, you know. I'm just a liar up here on stage. It's okay. No, thank you. It was very good. Thank you very much. It was certainly awake now. I wish I had a loud voice like this. All right. Next up, we have Jean Gauthier, and he will be talking about swimming with sharks.
I can be a loud talker, but I'm also lazy, so I'm going to use this. Okay, so first off, I'm going to get this right out of the way. I have swum with sharks. You don't need to ask that question. I'm still here. I'm still alive. We'll cover that later. Okay, so I often start my courses by asking this question of my students, and I'll ask it to you guys now. How likely, or no, let me put it this way. How many Americans do you think every year are killed by sharks? So first off, how many Americans are there? 350 million? Is that good? I'm looking to my American colleague for, say 350 million. So how many of those 350 million people get eaten or killed by sharks every year? Put a number in your head. Next question. How many Americans drown every year of those 350 million people? Anybody want to volunteer an answer to these 2 questions for me? You in the white. No, right. Oh, sorry, you know you. Okay, you got your hand up. That's even better.
I'll say killed maybe 0.
0? Okay.
I saw a post one day and it was like less likely to be
Okay.
killed by a shark.
Okay.
And how many Americans drown in a year? I mean, many people don't notice it, so I would say like a couple of thousand.
Okay, that's reasonable. Okay. Anyhow, this year, I asked this question to every single one of my students. I got about 140 of them. And I compiled the numbers and I looked at it, and I found the same thing I find every time I do this. They vastly overestimated how many Americans get eaten by sharks. They vastly underestimated how many people drown. So let's take a look at some numbers. First, number of people, I'm going to go with stats from 2021 because these were the best stats that I could find. So number of people killed by shark attacks in the US in 2021, there was 1. 1 person died, so it was a pretty good guess. Compare this with a couple other numbers. Number of people killed by lightning in the United States in 2021, 11. Number of people drowned in the United States, 4,000. We'll just go on a bit more. Number of people killed in car accidents in the US in 2021, 43,000. Americans killed by COVID in 2021, 400,000. Americans killed by cancer in 2021, 600,000. Americans killed by heart disease in 2021, 700,000. You don't need to be too worried. about dying in a shark attack. I should also point out that the US has the highest number of shark attacks of any country in the world. Australia is second. And if you're looking for places to swim in the US, Florida has the most shark attacks of any part of the US. But still, your chances are pretty low. So anyhow, we don't have to be that worried about being eaten by sharks or being killed in a shark attack. Confession. I am deathly afraid of being attacked by sharks. I know all this. I mean, obviously, I pulled up these stats. I should know better. But I'm terribly afraid. There's two reasons that I can give you. First reason. How many people have seen this movie? Or some sort of shark-related modern retake, Meg, or something like that, okay? So this movie came out, Jaws, the original came out in 1975. I wasn't even born yet, but I watched it probably too early. And it scarred me deeply, to the point where this summer I was swimming at Oka Beach. The thought crossed my mind. As a kid, I didn't want to go in the pool when my parents took us on vacation to the southern states, because I was just terrified of what if, right? What if a shark got in there somehow? This is totally irrational, obviously, but a big part of it is this movie. So if you saw the movie, it's about this shark that develops a taste for human blood. Sharks don't like the taste of human blood, right? They think we're seals. They usually bite us once, and then they go off. But often with great white sharks, they bite you once and you're dead anyways. So anyhow, I saw this, totally terrified me. Haven't watched that movie in a long time, but every time there's a story in the news about a shark attack, I have to read it, right? I can't help myself. So this young lady here is Addison Bethia. She lives in Florida. When she was 17 years old, she was attacked by a bull shark while swimming with her brother. Obviously, she lost her leg in the shark attack. She now swims in the same area, right? I can't fathom this. I read this story and I'm just like, how is that even possible? I read the story and I don't even want to go in the ocean anymore. But she's able to do it, right? As I said, I read every one of these stories that pops up. There was one just the other day. Somebody was killed in a shark attack in Australia. Actually, there was a news headline saying that the number of shark attacks increased by 100% in 2023, which means it went from 1 to 2. So, what does all this have to do with reality? I forgot to start my timer. Does that mean I could just go on? Oh, there we go. I got plenty of time. Obviously, the risk of shark attacks, not very real, or not very high. But that's shaped by my experiences with the film, with the media that I consume. And it plays into this thing called availability bias. Maybe people have heard of this before, availability bias. But basically, the more readily an image can come to your mind, the clearer the picture you could paint in your mind of this thing, the more likely you are to overestimate its probability. So for me, it's sharks, right? Everybody's got their thing. But for me, it's sharks. And the question for you is, what's your shark? What is the thing that is going to trip you up and mess up your ability to get a realistic assessment of risk? I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. I feel like I really need the next talk. I don't know what it's really about, but it sounds promising. It's Stephen Block, and he will talk about reality is a crutch. Stephen. yeah.
Just do that. And can I keep one down, or that is still one down? Okay, good, good, perfect, perfect. Okay, so now, and how do we get, right, so there it is. Now, teachers, of course, we were just on strike, and of course we wear these little buttons, you know, about solidarity and everything. That was the button that I wore in the 1960s. So why did I wear that button? You know, some people obviously associate it with actually the very first talk that we had here, which is the Yaqui way of knowledge, which means that you consume mushrooms or something else. And of course, you have what is supposed to be actually an altered state of reality. But according to the Yaqui way of knowledge, you're actually put in touch with reality. So I'll just explain what my connection was with reality at the time, as tenuous as it might have been. It's how we experienced it. In 1966, that meant seeing the world of new adventures, revolutionary times, but all informed by great thinkers and great books and great ideas. And that takes us away from our high school experience. It's an escape, but not an escape from reality, but to reality, albeit a very different one of experience, of the proverbial lived experience. Erich Fromm, somebody quoted Jung. Erich Fromm was a kind of a competitor. So Erich Fromm famously wrote about escape from freedom, and this was about escaping to freedom as we were living it and defining it. And there was consensus. There was actual consensus that was developing, maybe among hippies or however you wish to define it, that the conventional reality that we were brought up under was actually not very real. And so, and there was, it was not counted numerically, but it was in the wind. In Quebec, it was dans le vent. Here, too. It was about becoming thoughtful, more thoughtful and caring, but also being carefree in terms of what we were told we should be caring about, which was about facing reality. Okay, facing reality. This was about discovering what there was to discover. And much of that was about the social world, a world we were largely not, to that date, understanding the reality of, which, as it turned out, was the other reality of convention and coercion that told us that our new understanding of reality was not reality at all, okay? So for us, that reality of conformity and convention was just a crutch by comparison, okay? So, and then I have a quote from Bob Dylan from the 1960s, 1961, where he's a nascent folk singer. And he's telling a very different tale. 1961 was also the year of the beginning of the free speech movement at Berkeley, California. And so what he's saying here is that he had absolutely no idea the world that he was, in a way, helping to create, the world that he was entering. It was a complete mystery, but at the same time, it was totally liberating. The idea that you're actually venturing into something new, okay? And what were we learning about? What were we being informed about? I think I was very lucky in terms of the very beginning of my undergraduate program, because I really did take an interest in the books that were assigned to us I happen to be part of a new program where political science, sociology, and anthropology was integrated. And so that helped me actually understand this new reality that I felt had considerably, I won't say truth, but certainly something more significant than the reality that I was taught to face when I was leaving high school. Okay, so that's it.
Okay, so next up we have a very timely topic. It's actually called White Supremacy and Misinformation, and it's Sevak Manchikian who will present it.
In 2011, white supremacists first blew up a car bomb in a Norwegian city, got onto a boat, traveled to a small island where hundreds of young people your age were having a summer camp. This white supremacist killed upwards of 77 people, both in the car bombing and on that island. In 2018 in Pittsburgh, a gunman entered a synagogue and gunned down 11 individuals at prayer. In New Zealand in 2019, a gunman entered 2 separate mosques, live streaming a massacre of 51 Muslims at prayer. In 2019 in El Paso, Texas, a gunman entered a Walmart and gunned down 23 Latino Americans. In Buffalo, New York, in 2021, a gunman entered a supermarket and killed 10 Black Americans. If you're thinking that these are events that don't touch us in Canada, think again. In 2017, a man walked into a Quebec City mosque and killed 6 Muslims at prayer. And in 2021, a man driving a pickup truck in London, Ontario, ran over and killed 4 members of a Muslim family. Now, these events, gruesome as they are, and separated by time and space, are unfortunately linked together. And they're linked together by the ideology of white supremacism. Now, white supremacism is a notion that white Caucasians have a superiority over other groups, be they African, Asian, and Muslim. Examples of white supremacism include things like some elements of colonialism, the use of slaves in the United States, segregation in the United States, and the apartheid regime in South Africa. Now, today, in liberal societies like ours, white supremacist notions have been pushed aside based on our liberal principles and documents like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But as those events I detailed earlier demonstrate very clearly, there are a fringe number of people, a fringe, who are articulating white supremacist ideals through acts of violence. Now, often when these events take place, a misconception occurs. And again, this talk is all about misconception. A misconception occurs that these are actors who are acting as quote-unquote lone wolves, meaning they're not connected to a larger terrorist organization like an Al-Qaeda or an Irish Republican Army or the Baader-Meinhof group, that these are lone operators. That actually is a misconception. These are folks who are actually linked together with a vast network of literature that has provided them ideas and inspirations. And these ideas now, via the internet, have gone global. And these are folks who are actually linking together online and making heroes out of these murderers I discussed earlier. In fact, here's a shocking detail, and a chilling detail at that. The criminal who killed the 51 Muslims in New Zealand had the name of the Quebec City mosque attacker written on his assault rifle. That's how linked these people are. Yet our authorities, in order to quell the fears that society might have, regularly says that these folks are lone wolves. Now, what are these folks motivated by? Why are they carrying out these horrible attacks? Well, one of the misconceptions that they have is this notion of a so-called white genocide, that there is a secret cabal of elites. And that term, secret cabal of elites, that's often a coded set of words referring to a quote-unquote Jewish conspiracy. A lot of these white supremacist movements are not only Islamophobic, but they're highly anti-Semitic. They believe that this secret group is importing hundreds of thousands of migrants from Africa, from the Middle East, and Asia into countries like Europe and various North American regions in order to destabilize and destroy white European societies in Europe, in Australia, and in North America. Another motivation that draws these groups together and links them together is that they view that our society, our multi-ethnic, our plural, our liberal societies, are in fact corrupt. And what corrupts us is our mix of people, our racial diversity, our religious diversity. And in an attempt to destroy these liberal societies, as we well know, promote multiculturalism, the white supremacist attackers are trying to inspire fellow travelers in white supremacy to carry out copycat attacks and accelerate the demise of our societies. What they want is absolute chaos in order to recreate a new society, which would, of course, in their minds, become a white ethno-national state. In the coming years, there will be political, economic, and ecological catastrophes that are going to cause a great deal more migration of people from the south coming to the north. The white supremacists have demonstrated their strategy for dealing with this growing diversity. Our challenge in the coming years is to address their misconceptions and to hopefully avoid the kinds of tragedies that these folks want to create in our societies. Thank you.
So our next presenter is special because he's not actually a teacher in the humanities, he's a teacher in political science, but he has taught humanities courses before. It's some out of school, I think. I'm not quite sure where, but he will tell you if you're interested. His name is Brandon Spray, and he will talk on what is real human nature, fighting against a standard narrative. Brandon.
Can't see my notes. Okay. So, all right, never mind. I guess not. No, I tried. Okay, so I'll do my best here. Are you an IT guy coming to help me out here? Oh, amazing. Yeah, I changed that, so. This would be so helpful. Oh, there you are. Fantastic. How about a hand for the IT guy here? Yeah. Okay. Hello, folks. My name is Brandon Spray, as was mentioned. I've had the privilege of teaching humanities classes at 3 colleges, but here at Vanier, I teach political science. I, like many others, was educated to believe that I'm a monster. And what I'd like to talk about today is the growing evidence included in our evolutionary biology that can help us put together a picture of what a real human nature might look like. Now, the only issue is that the answers go against not just centuries, but millennia of scientific and philosophical thoughts, the standard narrative of human nature, or the Hobbesian view of human nature, which portrays us as more monster than human. Now, of course, when I speak of Hobbesian worldview, I'm referring to Thomas Hobbes. I'm sure there are philosophers out here who know more about him than I do, and maybe some students who've had to suffer through some excerpts of the Leviathan more recently than I. But essentially, what I'm referring to is Hobbes' view on human nature, which is seen in this famous quote. Hobbes didn't have much faith in us and believed without a society, or specifically without strong leadership within a government, we would turn to violence and chaos. I grew up in the States. I was never attacked by a shark, but I was socialized to believe in the Hobbesian worldview that we are all monsters deep down, but I never really connected to it. Like many students, I had to read the novel Lord of the Flies in high school and was struck by the fact that something seemed off about it. It's the story of a group of schoolboys who are castaways on an island, a very familiar narrative. And when doing research on this topic, I found out that William Golding, the author, was also a teacher like many of us here. And like Hobbes, Golding didn't have much faith in humanity, and especially his students, as the boys in the novel start murdering each other when left to their own devices. Now, reading stories that reinforce the standard narrative of human nature, and there are a lot of them, help to socialize us into losing faith in each other. In the real world, as pieced together by historian Rutger Bregman, there was an incident of schoolboys marooned on a deserted island a few years after Lord of the Flies was published. Yet there was no murder, no political angling. The boys worked together and survived, even tending to one boy's broken leg before being rescued after 15 months. The standard narrative of human nature is so pervasive that it's connected to ideas such as social Darwinism, neoliberal capitalism, authoritarianism, and these things still affect policymaking and impact the planet and everyone on it. Yet this view of human nature is at least incomplete, if not wrong. As far as we know, our species is more empathetic than any other creature that has or currently exists. And we can find this in a number of places. In our mirror neurons, which allow us to experience the plight of others as if we were experiencing it ourselves. This is why we cry or get scared in a movie, even when we know it's 100% fake. We could emotionally invest not only in strangers, but in fictional ones. And our strong desire for social bonding, which is why a touch from a loved one feels so different than our own, and why our sexuality is geared more towards social bonding than procreation. I'm not going to say anything more about sex, so I don't blush too much, but blushing is also connected to how we convey feelings and our connection with others, and it limits our ability to be deceitful. The long gestation period that mothers must endure, and the fact that our babies are helpless not only at birth, but for many years after, points to us being a species that must take care of each other in order to survive. When we expand beyond our biology to look at our history and anthropology, we see that throughout most of human history, we lived, as Richard Lee famously put, as fierce egalitarians. We demanded the sharing of resources and responsibilities, and this is seen throughout the world in various hunter-gatherer and indigenous communities. This demand for sharing shows that envy is in fact a good thing. James Sussman in his book speaks to the way envy, which is of course one of the supposed deadly sins, is a way to reinforce egalitarianism. Positing envy as a sin and something immoral helps to reinforce social stratification and hierarchies created by churches and other institutions, which I would argue goes against our real human nature. And when we see something we know is unfair, we get an uneasy feeling about it. That is not a sin, but an evolutionary response to warn us of injustice. Now, the first humanities course I taught was based exactly on this whole premise, fighting against the standard narrative. And I remember being so excited to tell my students, guess what, you're not all monsters. But of course, my students' response was, sir, trust us, we are all monsters. And I started to realize that the Andrew Tates and Jordan Petersons of the world were preying upon young people who are indoctrinated into this worldview. As pointed out in The Guardian just last week, this is a growing problem. It's hard to convince young people, including my younger self, that our real nature is to be kind creatures when we're responsible for so many horrors and atrocities. So I can forgive Hobbes, perhaps, for thinking that in a world full of violence and pain, that society is the only thing holding us together. But the good news is,
We are now closer to completing a clearer picture of a real human nature, and it's one that shows empathy is not weakness, kindness is not cowardice, and our capacity for love and cooperation is stronger than our capacity for violence and competition. Thank you.
Thank you for wrapping this up so quickly. We're a little bit under time pressure, I think. So last but not least, we have Sheila Das, who also happens to be the organizer of this fantastic symposium. So let's give her a special hand. And Sheila Das will talk about everyday ethics.
Our world today seems to be spinning around colliding crises, like various cyclones colliding into each other. We have, well, you guys know as well as I do what some of these crises are. Can anyone name a crisis that we're living with right now? Go ahead in the back. Absolutely. And there was another hand. Wars as well. Any other crises? Yeah? Go ahead. Inflation, definitely. And? Housing crisis? Yeah, an isolation crisis, mental health crises. Thank you. Go ahead. Climate crisis. We could go on and on. You guys are beginning to get the picture. These conditions can sometimes make our lives feel like there are big forces that are way beyond our control, and we're just being buffeted by them without any hope to have any say about what's going to go on in our future. Now, in my courses, I often talk about structural change, how important it is to confront big institutions to try to get them to make better decisions so that we can be a better society and live, let's say it quite frankly, in a happier world. But that's not what I'm going to advocate for today. The problem with the scenario I've just painted is that many of the changes that we need to make with big institutions, government, law, take years to come into effect. And honestly, with hundreds or thousands of people on board, to create effective leverage. So the change that we're interested in making will seem distant, sometimes abstract, even invisible, that it's so far removed from ourselves. And so we can get disheartened. And all our efforts come into question because we don't see the change we're working towards. Is it real when we can't see it? Of course it is. But it may not seem real. And there can be so many competing factors that our efforts, even our best efforts, can come to naught. So what can happen is that we end up feeling like we don't have any agency. Do not despair. There is one part of our lives where we are totally in control, where we indisputably have agency, and we get to enact that every single day. Can you guess what that is? In our relationships with each other. The Anglo-Irish philosopher Iris Murdoch has said that the most important thing you do is how you treat other people in your everyday life. We do this by seeing them, by giving them our attention. And as she says in The Sovereignty of Good, attention is rewarded by a knowledge of reality. Eva Maria Duringer explains her view that learning to attend to others, to look at them justly and lovingly, is our main moral project in life. What matters is that we see people and everything else as they really are. A task as difficult as it is simple. This is difficult because we live in an attention economy, and our attention is constantly being mined and being robbed by our devices as they're programmed to do so. We become distracted from each other. And it's cliche but true to say, our social media communications have created frequency, but distance, and alienation, and isolation. We know each other less the further we are away. We also know each other less the more we look away, gaze into our devices, and do not see our quote-unquote friends, and how our online comments may hurt them. We also know each other less when we presume we already know them, and we stop listening. As communication scientist Hasten Moon has said, today we're pushed into camps of beliefs, of who is likable and who is condemnable, not places of debate of what is right or wrong, or what is true or false. By condemning the other, a fellow classmate, a fellow colleague, a former friend, we tell ourselves they are not worth knowing, and indeed fall outside our moral circle of care and concern. I am arguing that these are poor ways of knowing each other, of knowing what's real about another person. As a two-time guest to the symposium, a human rights lawyer and a member of the International Court, Payam Akhavam has said, it is easier to point the finger, but it's more meaningful to do something that builds connection, community, and empathy. But attending to our relationships is also simple to do. In short, what is real? You are. The people sitting beside you are. I am. The animal and plants around us are. So what am I telling you? If you want a better world, look to yourself. You can be the compassion you want to see in the world. Not so much by clicking a like or a heart on your favorite social media, but by opening your eyes and your ears and your hearts to those people around you who are similar, and especially to those people around you who are different in your here and now. And in your own way, in your own life, you will make a difference. And through them, you'll make a difference to the world. That is something that is real. Should be on. Hello. There.
Okay, so we don't have very much time. We have 5 minutes. Is there any pressing question anybody has?
No pressure.
No pressure at all. A question you really wanted to ask? Oh, yes.
So I forgot the name, but I had a question for the shark person. That you exactly, Sean? Yes, but then where did you swim with the shark? Because I would like to do that as well. and he pulled out a shark?
It was a nurse shark. Totally harmless.
Okay. Thank you. No, it's okay.
Okay, any other questions? Yeah.
I have a question for Sean again. So I was with you like last semester in your class. so I know pretty much a lot of stuff. But I have a question, because you said like there was 2 reasons you're afraid of sharks. The first reason was like the Jaws movie, but what was the second reason? Oh, okay, okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, maybe one more chance. Not about sharks, something else. I have to go around. Hang on.
Yes, my question relates to the word real. And as I listened to the presentations, I was wondering if I was a contractor and I was building something, would I have to have real facts, real? Would they have to be real? As I was wondering, are you really talking about boundaries? Were the boundaries that were given when you were in high school and so on and so forth, are they real? And did you discover whether they were real or not? And what was beyond those boundaries?
This is a question for who exactly now? For Tim or for David? The whole lineup. So I don't know. Who wants to answer it?
I'll take it. I'll start us off. Yes, we could talk about the superego or the parent or the authority, the structures that we grow up in that tell us this is how to live. That's something real. And our reaction to it, where we can embrace it if we accept it and we believe in it, or we push back against it gently or violently, that also is real.
Okay. I was just told we have to leave, so I'm very sorry for being so abrupt. Can we give a big hand to our presenters, please? All right. Thanks and see you soon. Okay.